Ep.1 to start. How you guys doing? Good morning. It's 1:59 a.m. today. I'm Bizer, and what I do is I started in graffiti art long time ago when I was 17 years old. I'm 46 now, so you guys do the math. So Bizer was a person I was tagging in the streets of LA, and I learned how to do graffiti. I wasn't very good then, but as I got older, I started getting better. What happened is at the age of 17, I just saw too much chaos and graffiti and gangs and all that stuff, so I decided to stop and then pursue my art career as an artist, of course. So I got into airbrushing. That was the closest thing to graffiti. So I started painting hats and clothing and hoodies and stuff, and that eventually landed a job at Universal Studios. So I got into doing caricatures and also worked for major companies doing stuff for different people. And then all of a sudden, a big tragic event happened in my life. Before I get into this tragic event that happened to me, I want to talk a little bit about more or less what I did. I became a professional illustrator. I learned how to paint in acrylic and oils. I did many canvases and literally became professional. I opened my own company. So all this time I actually focused 100% on my career, and I left the past behind. But the tragic thing that happened to me was I lost my mom at the age of 35. So that really threw a wrench in the gear because I was emotionally distraught. So what happened is it took me back to my roots, which was graffiti art, and I embraced it, and I went back into it really, really hard, really strong, and developed my styles and developed many things that I had not developed when I was young. And then that's how I kind of got back into the graffiti scene. One of the cool things is I had a 3-state championship that I got, a battle that I got into, going into the finals and, taking second place, and got my ass whooped by a little young kid. That was actually very good. So what I learned from all that is that we have to learn to go within ourselves, to search that person within that we really want to be, and then to never forget what our roots are and to build on top of that. And I think I had lost that, the reality of me being who I really am, which is a street kid, growing up. So that's basically who I am. And I changed my name from Bizer to Adone. And then my son once, we're Latino, so he saw it tagged on a piece of paper and he says Adone. And I thought that was really cool, very original, and was different from graffiti, and it was more artistic. So that's how I became Adone. And that's what I use now, aka Adone. That's the history about the name and more or less who I am. And as we do this podcast, you'll learn more about me, what I do, what I perfect in or specialize in, my fortes. But right now, I would like to talk about how the traditionalism evolved into modernism. And I think that's very important because a lot of people today, all the millennials and the young people, they really don't know about tradition and where things come from. But France was actually the country, I believe, that brought things into modern times, more contemporary. The first thing they did is they started changing the color palette. They incorporated red as a primary, which this is untrue. Red is actually a secondary color. It's made by mixing quinacridone, magenta, and yellow. Almost 50% of each, more magenta than yellow usually, to get the right color or hue of red. And then so by doing this, France created a palette that was more dark, not as clean and not as beautiful, making the paintings a little muddy at times. But this is actually cool too, because then you start seeing paintings that were more emotionally intense. You had these really muddy purples and browns and stuff. So it changed the whole outlook on art. Me personally, I'm a traditionalism. I paint in traditional styles, and then just bring the modern era into traditionalism, which is something kind of cool, I think. But yeah, one of the questions I think we might have from people is what France did to influence or give their 2 cents, for lack of a better term, into the world of art worldwide. And I think one of the things they offered is they offered Matisse and they offered Picasso. These were people who went from, at least Picasso came from Spain and went to France to escape, the political situation that was going on in Spain at the time. And, dealing or befriending people like Matisse and Diego Rivera at the time in France, and sharing ideas with those cats, must have been a pretty cool thing. Coming up with Cubism and then, more expressional or expressionist type of styles that were abstract, but at the same time there was a lot of aspects of just impulsive way of drawing or painting at the time. I think these are very important things that you could say France put out there. The era of surrealism, also with Salvador Dali and the artists and writers and filmmakers movement. That was really huge. And how they promoted new concepts in the arts, how to really push the envelope, I think was very important, and I think France had a lot to do with that. At least moving it to America. Yeah, and so there's a lot of stuff that I would like to get into. Just hit us up in the comments and let us know what you guys want to hear, what you would like me to talk about as far as art goes. Yeah, I'm exceptionally pretty good, and then I can do my researches and come up with exact dates and things to be more precise. But in the topics of actual painting, I don't need a textbook. I can just speak from my own experience and just give you my concept of what I think art is, and then you guys can just go from there, agree or agree to disagree. But one of the things I want to talk about is going back into the palette, of red, blue, and yellow. This kind of took away from the beautiful colors. Like if you mix blue and red, you don't get purple. You get this muddy purple looking color. It's almost brownish. But you compare it to the traditionalism that they use quinacridone magenta, and you mix it with blue, and you get these beautiful purples, kind of like the Laker purple, and lavenders that are just gorgeous. Like you can paint flowers with them and stuff like that. I think that's what the difference is. And I use both. Sometimes I'll use stuff straight from the tube. I'll use black straight from the tube just to make it look more synthetic, or just raw, more dark, is one of the things that I would do when using black. But there's a lot of stuff that you don't really do if you're a traditional artist. You don't use black straight from the tube, and you don't use red to make purple. You use magenta. And so these are the type of things that France changed and made popular with post-impressionism and abstract and cubism and stuff like that. So we have France, that basically the artists that lived there created all these you could say movements, starting in the 1800s all the way into the 1900s, and we got everything in between from there, from abstract to, or cubism to abstract to expressionism. And then, of course, you got pointillism, and then you got into minimalism. And like I said, if you guys want to hear more about these eras and explained, then just hit us up in the comments, ask questions. We're open, to get feedback from you guys. I think this is basically a podcast for people who just love art, who just want to talk art or about the arts, music and, dance or other stuff, culturally speaking about different topics. So the interesting thing about France is that we come into the modern times with the artists, right? And then you had people like Salvador Dali that also kind of left Spain and went into America because it was just chaotic. But then you had Diego Rivera from Mexico, right? That was also influenced by France, because he lived there, and how he met Picasso, and then how he did some cubism also at the early stages of his career, and how he met Frida Kahlo, and then how they were in the Communist Party. So all these things kind of emanated from this country. France was very artistic at the time, very not artistic, I don't mean to say, but more like supportive of the arts in the world, compared to other places that were going through like war, civil wars and political situations. So cut to, we're in the 70s in New York City, and then you had this guy by the name of Van Baudet, French guy, who was a cartoonist. He did some really cool cartoons, had many volumes. One of the ones really famous, Erotica, was a real famous series he had, and there's a lot of them. Right now I can't just say them off the top of my head, but he had a lot of them. And this guy did these really cool cartoon styles, very modern, very cool, but he painted also for adults. So he had a lot of nude women, a lot of nudity, but then he had like these lizards and other animals that were cool looking. They were wearing like bomber jackets. So just imagine our world, but instead of being human, you were like a lizard and a frog and, a rabbit or, a crocodile. It was just animals. But then he had these women that he called broads, and they were sometimes gigantic and they were nude. So he would have these jokes and these stories that he would tell, these books, and those books became highly popular. But what ended up happening is that in the hip-hop era, when breaking started coming out, hip-hop, with MCs, and graffiti was at its peak, a lot of graffiti writers went into these books, these erotica books by Van Baudet, and started putting his characters on walls. So they became very popular in the graffiti community. So, you have people that, Cheech Wizard was one of the characters that was very popular. And then you had also the Lizard that was very popular. And you saw these characters, on like subways and walls. But another thing is that you also saw other original characters that were influenced by this cartoonist. So people started coming up with their own characters, but you can see the influence of this guy Van Baudet. And he has a son. His son is Mark Baudet. So Van Baudet dies, and Mark Baudet takes over his estate, you could say, all his books and all his artwork. He inherits, and he's a successor of the Van Baudet franchise, and continues to do that, and writes about it, from New York. And all these graffiti artists kind of started building their styles and their their talent and their creativity from a lot of these artists that lived in that era. Salvador Dali influenced a lot of people. Frank Frazetta was another one. He influenced a lot of people with his fantasy art. You had Boris Vallejo. So all this was going on, in the 70s, 80s. And it went right into the 90s with graffiti peaking. And you gotta understand, graffiti survived many, many years, from like the 70s all the way up until now. We're in 2021. Graffiti's being accepted in galleries now. They're selling it. It's been in music videos. And there's a lot to say about that culture. There's a lot to say about the hip-hop culture and how things evolve and sometimes kind of separate and then come back together, But it's cool. It's cool to have been an artist from that era, because I was able to pick up my animation and cartooning skills from it. And then, of course, my illustration skills from some of these artists that influenced me. I'm a huge lover of Salvador Dali. I've read a lot of his books. I think Homage to Dali is one of the best books I've ever read. I love Michelangelo also, from the High Renaissance, the artist of the Sistine Chapel, who painted on his back for over 3 years, and became blind in the process. Or not permanently, but, had bad eyesight by the time he died. And a lot of conspiracies that went on in that time with him and Leonardo da Vinci and Caesar Borgia, which was one of the kings. So all this stuff has influenced my art. There's a fellow I like a lot. His name is Maxwell Beckman. He's a German painter. His story is very similar to mine. He used to paint very beautifully, like Rembrandt, very, impressionistic and very beautiful. And then his mom died, and it really put a twist and a shift in his artwork. His paintings right after were dark and, disturbed paintings. I loved them, but, they were very emotional, very dramatic, a lot of symbolism. This guy was just, he said that was the worst experience he had in his life. And it really changed his work and the way he saw things. And I think as artists, we should really dig inside and find that person within us, that artist, and just be ourselves and not try to copy anything or anybody, because everything's already been done. It's refreshing when you see an artist that is coming up with its own ideas and its own styles, and they're mixing tradition with modernism, and then they do a painting and it's totally balanced and it just looks really cool and fresh, and that's, I think, what artists should do, and just really dig inside, and get inspired, get influenced by whoever you love, whoever you like, but not to try to copy or do his style, because you'll just be a carbon copy, a cheap carbon copy of that artist. But better yet, get the techniques, learn them, try to, make them your own, and then from there build something that's completely original. And I think this is where artists really come out and do some really cool stuff. So this is basically an introduction to the podcast of what the things we're going to be talking about. Hopefully you guys find interest in, what we're talking about, and you guys hit us up and ask us questions. We'll love to talk to you and see what you think about what we have to say. So this is Interdimensional Subjects on that Betty White edition. Adone, over and out. Peace.